Equal Education is seeking answers from the Department of Basic Education over fears the deadlines to fix ailing school infrastructure will be affected by proposed changes to legislation. Researcher Elizabeth Biney joins me. Elizabeth, good evening and welcome. You have a problem with the draft amendments to the norms and standards for public school infrastructure. Please share why.
As you know, as a movement advocating for quality education in South Africa, we went to court in 2018 to ask the judge to get the department to fix the errors or the gaps in the norms so that infrastructure provisioning in schools will be accelerated and learners will have access to the right and appropriate safe infrastructure to be able to enjoy the right to basic education. Now, the proposals that the minister is making is actually essentially going to take us back to where we started from, which is if the deadlines are removed from the current norms, we're going back to the stage of the status quo of before the norms itself were written or signed into law. So that for us is definitely unacceptable. We will not stand for it, and we want those deadlines to be replaced or put back into the law so that we can hold the government accountable for its promises and its responsibilities to learners across the country.
Before I move on to the next question, just to confirm what the status is, have the deadlines been scrapped or are they at risk of being scrapped based on these proposed amendments?
So the proposal is not finalized because it has not been written into law yet. But if we do not get enough people to object to this proposal and the department goes ahead with implementing it or introducing it into the law, it essentially means that those deadlines, the 3-year, your 7-year, and your 10-year timelines that they themselves set to work towards eradicating the infrastructure backlogs in the country will essentially be removed from the law, meaning that it gives them space or gap to be able to provide infrastructure as and when they deem fit. So we could see schools waiting for 10, 20 years to get the basic infrastructure that they deserve.
And there'll be a great deal of uncertainty related to that. Now, South Africa, according to the DBE's own data, still has almost 3,000 pit latrines at schools nationally. 12% of schools don't have electricity, 7% no access to water. How do legislation changes affect the eradication of, amongst others, pit latrines?
So essentially what these changes are supposed to do is to improve and obviously fast track the provisioning of these infrastructures that we are talking about. So already we know the government has missed the 2016 deadlines, the 2020 deadline, and at risk of missing the 2023 deadline as well. So what essentially the changes in the legislation is going to do is that it's going to basically give them leeway to act in an unlawful manner, because when the law was enacted, pit latrines was immediately illegal. It was banned from public schools. Yet we are seeing a lot of schools that have to contend with this form of unsafe and dignified sanitation. So we want those deadlines to be put in place. And in addition to that, the minister needs to explain to us why they are consistently missing deadlines and putting the health and safety and the dignity of learners at risk on a daily basis. And yet we expect these learners to excel against all odds and to be able to go ahead and contribute significantly to the economy and to the society. It's highly unfair and it is unacceptable, and the minister needs to do something immediately. And we demand that they hold a meeting with stakeholders and engage us meaningfully, not just try to sneak the law into the government gazettes.
Well, so far, you've resorted to protest and you've tried to raise the alarm in other ways. Why do you think you're not being listened to?
I think we honestly, we are living in a society where this government is taking us for granted. We give our needs and inputs, and then we sort of are sidelined, and they tend to do whatever it pleases them. But we are saying that the buck stops with us. We've been waiting for quality education for a long time. Marginalized and poor communities and learners are at a great disadvantage. We are beginning to see the socioeconomic divide widening. COVID has shown us that there are other sectors of society that live in unimaginable, inhumane way, and the government needs to stop pussyfooting around the issue and actually engage us in a meaningful way and actually do their due diligence to learners. They need to come to the party and actually fulfill their legal, moral, political mandate to learners. They cannot just be giving us excuses and the run around. So we are protesting, we have started, and we're going to continue until they get heard.
You alluded to the impact earlier, Elizabeth, to learners and their well-being in these environments. Do you want to share a little bit more about how their daily school lives are being affected, their ability to have a quality education in these environments?
So when we talk about quality education, often, these bureaucrats and technocrats, they tend to focus the honing on pedagogical intervention approaches like your teaching and learning materials, teachers, and all those things. Those things are important, but also the environment or the context in which teaching and learning happens is equally important. And if that environment is not conducive, you can do and improve and give as much pedagogical intervention as you can. The situation is not going to improve for the better. So there needs to be a multifaceted approach to the way that we address the quality in our education system. So until a learner falls into a pit latrine and loses his life, we have a government that is slow in reacting, right? But when there's a death or a crisis or a tragedy like this, we see them coming up with promises, giving us numbers, what they're planning to do to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Why is it that we have to get to a stage where someone loses their life or their dignity for the government to realize that this state of our infrastructure is not acceptable and it needs to change?
Right. Elizabeth, thank you very much for that. Of course, we'll have along the course of our program and programs in future, a detailed response from the Department of Basic Education to these critical criticisms that Equal Education is levelling against the department. A principle amongst them is the reasons for why the deadlines are not being met. That was the Elizabeth Biney, who is a researcher with Equal Education.